would find a very, very small number of supposedly Orthodox Jews in the army. It's rare to find.
Part of Judaism is because I believe the book has lots of writings in it that are very inhumane.
God forbid there's inhumane issues in the Talmud. It's very important to understand. This is one of the sad, tragic happenings from today, where the Zionists are using any verse they can, not only from the Talmud but from the Torah as well. As I was told, I didn't have a chance to follow the news, exactly what I was told over the phone, that there are some quotes of some edicts of today's Zionist leaders that supposedly, God forbid, the Jewish religion would allow the killing of innocent Palestinian children. This is terrible. This is painful. This is against whatever is holy. By taking out verses out of context, anybody can do that in any religion. There are many criticisms to Islam as well. Whether that's true or not, the Muslims should say, I'm sure it's not true. Exactly. Well, I wouldn't even consider this interpretation. It's misconstruing. Interpretation most probably would be true, but misconstruing and taking out of context is something very terrible. But the main thing we have to remember is what Rabbi Weiss mentioned before. Muslims, Islam, and Islamic leaders never had a problem with Jewish people and never had a problem living together with people following Jewish faith. The Talmud is nothing new. The Orthodox Jewish observant Jews always believed in the Torah, always believed in the Talmud. This wasn't a reason of not being able to coexist and to hate each other. And this is a proof, at least religious people would understand it, this is a proof that most of these things, or all of them, are totally wrong.
If you could give people a soundbite, a short thing that they could walk away with, a short statement that they could walk away, what would the message be that you would want to give them about how Jews feel about Islam today?
We need to remember, first of all, the big difference between Judaism and Zionism. It's not in the same. The State of Israel does not represent Judaism, neither the entire Jewish people. And as far as Islam, we always had a different religion. The Torah never changed. Islam, the Quran never changed. We did live in peace. We did respect each other. It's only this purely political state of Israel that causes the problem.
We got on this publication on the 26th of April 2005. We saw on South African television when the Orthodox Jews were being chased out of the synagogues. I don't know if you remember watching it on television. And the news that we got covered for South Africa was that they refused to leave Palestinian land. That was the reason that the Jewish forces were coming to remove Orthodox Jews out of the synagogues because they refused to leave Palestinian land that was being given to back to the Palestinians. Now, what is the real story? Because we're seeing it from the news on the one side.
Well, that was true. What happened is there was those settlers, which happened to be a very extreme minority within religious Jews, and they are real, like let's call it right-wing extremists, fighting for Zionism in their specific extreme way. They were occupying the place as other parties. That's not the only place that's occupied Palestinian territory. They refused to go out since they were in that settlers philosophy. They refused to leave, and Sharon insisted they should leave. Whether this was the solution to the problem, definitely we are happy that specific areas were returned to the Palestinians, but it's already a time passed since then, and we see it didn't get us to the real solution. The only real solution would be, and we say this being religious Jews, according to our religion, the entire state of Israel has to be dismantled, the government has to be given up, we have to restore the entire sovereignty to the indigenous Palestinian population, and we will, with God's help, hopefully, be able to live together.
Controversy about the Temple of Solomon has to be rebuilt after Masjid al-Aqsa is destroyed.
Okay, this is a very important issue, and we need to understand this. Yes, there is a difference of opinion in many parts of religion between one religion and another, but we need still to understand where our similarities are. In Judaism, we believe that we would not destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and we need to remember this. We are in an exilic period, as Rabbi Weiss mentioned before. We are forbidden and condemned forbidden not to fight other people, and definitely not fight other religions. We do believe that it's going to come a time when it's going to be a spiritual change over the world, where God is going to reveal His glory to the entire humanity, and all nations together will join together and serve the one God. We pray, one of our prayers regarding the destruction of our temple, and this is a prayer we say once a year. It's the afternoon of the day where we remember the destruction of our holy temple. We say, God, you have destroyed the temple in fire, and we wait that you should rebuild this in fire. It's two concepts. Number one is God is the one to rebuild this, and number one, this is going to be in fire, referring to a spiritual happening, not a man-made. Now, whether other people from other faiths would agree with this, that's up to every individual. But at least we are not forcing our hands on another people, and we would definitely not do any physical means for that. Now, to answer very short to the question whether Jews should or will destroy an Al-Aqsa Mosque, God forbid.
There are DVDs available. If I could have a copy of those produced by the Neturei Karta, which would obviously be made available by the IPCI. It's called Can Jews and Arabs Live Together in Peace by Rabbi Yisrael David Weiss. This was a lecture at the University of North Texas, I believe during the beginning of this year. If I may just probably spark some discussion on this, Rabbi, you were intimating earlier on that there was, to a certain extent, in fact to a large extent, and you had amplified that in your in the question and answer session, that there was some kind of nexus between the Third Reich and you had the so-called elite Jewish families, individuals, Zionist families, and so on. Now, I've got a quotation here by the Canadian writer called Greg Fulton. He says, Israel would not be possible today if the World Zionist Congress and other Zionist agencies hadn't formed common cause with Hitler's exterminators to rid Europe of Jews. In exchange for helping round up non-Zionist Jews, sabotage Jewish resistant movements, and betray the trust of the Jews, the Zionists secured for themselves safe passages to Israel. This was formalized in a number of immigration agreements signed in 1938. The most notorious case, I think you mentioned about Dr. Kastner, but to secure the safe passage of 600 Zionists to Palestine, Dr. Kastner, if I stand to be corrected, helped Nazis send 800,000 Hungarian Jews to their death. And the Israeli Supreme Court, obviously, as you mentioned, whitewashed Kastner's crimes. But interestingly, I've got a quote by David Ben-Gurion, December 17, 1938. He says, the saving of Jewish lives from Hitler is considered here as a potential threat to Zionism unless they are brought to Palestine. When Zionism had to choose between the Jewish people and the Jewish state, it should unhesitatingly prefer the latter. And so that basically gives the indication that somehow or the other, it was as if there was this active allegiance between the World Zionist Congress, Nazi Germany, and of course the impending catastrophes of the Second World War. If you wish to comment on that.
Like we've said, people view our opposition and our vilification of the Zionists as if, and I think it would come out at the end of such a thing, as if the whole Zionist world or the people who approve it are all evil and wanted the death of the Jews. I just have to clarify that. There were amongst the Zionist people who gave their lives, who worked to save Jews also. There are people who want human rights, and there are people, as I say, many who've been conned. In other words, there's many, many levels amongst the people who either are pro-Zionist, strongly pro-Zionist, or just who are people, the silent, I don't want to say majority, but but unfortunately maybe it would be the majority. People are just quiet in the face of what's happening. So, although the Zionist leadership is implicated, it's clearly, and we have much more. While you were speaking, I was thinking of a few other cases that we can say that are also shocking. We have that the Zionists sunk Jews of refugees after the war, when there were skeletons. They've gone through. It's again in the Holocaust. Victims accused, and we have made a copy of one paper how, and it's in the documents and so forth, that they've bombed. In the ports that came into Haifa, they were implicated with and their own writings with bombing the Patria, Atlanta. They had bombed, and there was a reason. There was it's a whole Atlantic. The ship. It says that there was 1,771 immigrants on the steamship Pacific and Milos. And it came into port there, and in a third ship, the Atlantic, was approaching with another 1,783 Jews. It arrived on November 24th, 1940, and arrangements were made by the British to transfer the overcrowded ship, the Patria, to another passenger ship. And then this was on November 24th. On November 25th, with thousands of people watching, the Patria was blown up by an explosion. She sunk in a quarter of an hour. 252 Jewish refugees were, for Hitler's burning hell, lost their lives. I'm quoting from the book Holocaust Victims Accused. The Zionist propaganda machine turned on full force, declaring that the sinking of the ship was a mass suicide protest against the British refusal to forbid entry of the Jews. But the Commission of Inquiry subsequently appointed said that the damage to the Patria had been committed by the Jabotinsky Begin gang, the Irgun Tzvi Leumi, in close cooperation with the Haganah and Palmach gang. If you know, these are all what are truly terrorist organizations. In fact, the Jewish people, besides these blowing up, they terrorized the Jewish community. Who were living in Palestine, and I could speak about that. They forced conscripted Jewish youth. They pulled them in. They took people off refugee ships and put them in the front. They didn't know what was happening. Put guns in their hands, and they say, "These are your enemies. They want to kill you." They didn't even know how to use the guns. As cannon fodder, they used them. And it was only but in this case here, it was in 1940. The commission had made inquiries, and they saw the damage to the Patria was committed not by the British and not by a suicide, but by of the people on the ship. But the Haganah Palmach gang was the Haganah General Staff admitted that it ordered the ship blown up in order to lay charge at the door of the authorities, mandatory authorities, the British. David Flinker wrote November 27, 1950, in the New York Morning Freiheit, a well-known paper of the time, that the Haganah ordered the English must be given to understand the Patria must be blown up. The decision was conveyed to Haganah members of the Patria, and so forth. In other words, what they've done. There's so many different crimes, that they were implicated with. Like I say, you have to always put in perspective. We have morals because the Almighty gave us morals and what's proper and what's not. They've taken God out of the equation, and therefore lives, and first of all the hate of religiosity and religious people that brings to what they're doing, but at the same time anything that stands in the way of achieving their goal of their nationalism, their Zionism, gets sacrificed on the altar of Zionism. Everything that stands in the way. Why? Because what's the moral ruler in such a thing? They don't have God to rule. So therefore, we find the murder and what's being done to the people in Palestine, and what they've been done to the Jews throughout all this time. So this is to put in perspective. And many people, they have so many ploys to do it, whether anti-Semitism, the Bible to legitimize it, fear-mongering. They're very, very successful. We call it the works of the Satan.
I want to know the relationship between the Jewish community and the Falashis of Ethiopia.
Falashis.
Falashis.
As far as the Jewish teaching, as I said, there's no difference between race, creed, or color. There's no such thing as racism in Judaism. God it's God's world. Everybody is the same in the eyes of God. There's no such thing. It's God, everybody's God's creation. To say because a person is from Africa or this and that, and the Eastern European have a right to be Jewish or whatever these things. But if you find that people are given a hard time or whatever in the Jewish community to accept Judaism, or to be accepted as from the Jewish community, because if it is in our community such a thing, the issue is that two things. First of all, people have human frailties. Sometimes you can find that people abuse a person or whatever, and that doesn't mean the Torah. It doesn't mirror on God or the Torah. It means that individual, that rabbi or whoever it is, did something. And the concept, and the issue of falash, the problem is that we've known, and as far as I know, I haven't dealt very deeply in this, but anybody who cannot, in the Jewish, we're very strict that it has to be compliant with the laws of the Torah. And if somebody, for instance, wants to marry into the Jewish, a Jewish woman or or somebody wants a Jewish man, you're required to see that the person is properly Jewish. If it was a conversion for a Jew, you have to know that the conversion was done legitimately and so forth. And the same thing if somebody comes along from another country and says he's Jewish or whatever, you have to understand if it's questionable or not. And if we don't have the history, then sometimes it's required to make a conversion. And that doesn't mean because they're from Africa or the Falashis or they will be from Eastern Europe, or if there's a question, then sometimes it has to require a new conversion or something because we don't have the history. And there's nothing wrong altogether with that. So what is if they have to again convert? Because what is wrong with that? They just have to go through it. They feel, in other words, that sometimes it's questioning their heritage. But that's what we say. It's not ours that we can follow our emotions or what's convenient for us. And if we feel that's going to that's pressure on us, therefore we're not going to follow the laws. If the teaching of the Torah, if it says that you have to accept these people, and there's no racism, but you have to accept them because it's acceptable, their heritage, then we accept them. It's not our will, it's exactly what the Torah will. It's not that we can make that decision. If it's considered a questionable heritage or we don't know because it's our ignorance in that area, we just don't know, then it's required, then we have to do the conversion. It's nothing to do with feelings. Unfortunately, Zionism works with their feelings, and therefore people have claims against them and they're rabid at them because they know it's false, and it has to do with their convenience, but not in the true religious community.
If I may just terminate it on one last question, which I think the Rebbe I'd like to... You were involved in a conference with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and I think the mass media spoke about the fact that you were involved in Holocaust denial and so on. Could you perhaps just elaborate your views on this particular Iranian leader? What's his particular position, and what was the outcome of the conference? And this will be the last question.
Now it happens to be that their approach to Iran, to President Ahmadinejad, is altogether false because he's not an enemy. As far as we know, he's not an enemy, and there's not just because the Zionists say, which shouldn't be even a question as far as we know. Because the Zionism wants to make suspect the person. It happens to be that he has a community of 25,000 Jews under him. And it happens to be that the paper, I used to have a copy of it, at the forward, anybody could Google it. They wrote a front page article around a year ago about him, about Iran, and they wrote, it's interesting, he said he wants to wipe off the state of Israel from the map, and yet he gives charity to the Jewish community there. In other words, it happens to be that he never said that. As far as we know, at the time that we Googled, we checked, he wrote, and there's Juan Cole, he's a professor in the University of Michigan, wrote that he always spoke in Persian. He speaks in Persian, not in English. And he said they falsely translated his words. And it was repeated in the London Guardian, London Times, London Guardian, I believe, from Jonathan Cole. And he wrote that it's clear they was misconstrued his words. He never said that he wants to wipe off the Jews. What he does say, he speaks religion, he's a Muslim, and he speaks religion. He says that God doesn't like evil. And God will not allow an evil thing to exist. Exactly what we say. We don't want destruction. people always say, they call for the destruction of Israel. We call for the dismantlement, speedy and peacefully. And he doesn't say he's going to destroy it. He says that God will not allow it to. We hope that it will be peaceful. So they falsely portray his words. We went to him at the time. We went to him a few times. We met him when he came to the United Nations. We sat with him for over an hour. We met him the second time. We met with him a few times, each time over an hour, and we spoke to him at length. And he kept on showing his warmth for the Jewish people and said he has nothing. He respects we spoke out his respect and protection for the Jewish people. And it's just that he says Zionism is wrong. He said if the Jews suffered in the Holocaust, so why do the Palestinian people have to pay the price for what Germany did? Why do they have to be, and so forth. He didn't. But the Zionists vilify anybody because it's convenient for them, and they have the mic in their hands much longer than I have, and they're able to do what they do. So then afterwards he made a conference where he wanted to bring up this subject, and he didn't call the Holocaust Denial Conference, which was given the official name by the Zionists around the world. He called it, he wanted to speak about the Holocaust, being that he knows that the Zionists manipulate and use the Holocaust, and he was upset with their whole approach to him and to everything. So most probably that's why he made that conference, and he spoke about that it was the first comment at the opening session. There were supposed to be many scholars on the issue of the Holocaust were supposed to come. They were intimidated, they didn't come, because Zionist pressure, and so it was supposed to be a very well balanced issue. And we happen to know when we were there, we can attest to the fact that most of the people, they weren't Holocaust deniers at all. There was a group who denied ridiculous things, that how much gas and it wasn't gas, and when they said this, there was hissing in the crowd there, and the other people were totally upset. The others, when they hear even this issue. But most of the people came, and the foreign minister, when he opened the session of the conference, said, we are out here basically because why do the Palestinian people have to pay for that? And I spoke immediately afterwards, and I said that it's in our blood, the Holocaust, and we are certain that the result of this conference will be acceptance and a knowledge of the fact that millions of Jews died, but they died because they're Jews, and it shouldn't be used to oppress another people. And the Reuters, BBC, everybody reported it truly to the word. Associated Press came along and wrote that I said it was exaggerated. From thin air. You can hear my speech, you can see it and hear it on our side. And they went and it was spread out by the Zion around the world, and they were able to vilify the Turkic Carta, to permanently damage, because now all of a sudden the Turkic Carta is deniers of the Holocaust. And it took me 2 weeks after I came back. We were there 2 weeks, I came back, I fought them tooth and nail to make a retraction. We have the retraction, I have it in my papers here. And so basically, they vilify everybody, they vilify me, blatantly falsifying the things. And then it was a statement from the president on his site, from the president of Iran, where he wrote that the solution to the problems is that they should follow the religious leaders, and all the religions are under like in a prison in Palestine. And he said, I have the paper. Unfortunately, I don't have it on side. The time doesn't allow, but I have the. But basically, he said that not only the Muslim, he said the Muslims, the Christians, and the Jews are on this. They're not given their freedom to say what they want. But he said, do not put the blame on the Jewish people for the crimes. Even the genocide of women and children should not be blamed on the Jewish people. Now this is people that say he's the hero of the anti-Semites. He said a thing that if he's the hero, people listen to him. And he said you shouldn't blame the Jews, even if genocide of the women and children, because it's not the Jews who are to be implicated. Why wasn't this? He said this on their side officially, and he said it after a meeting with us. This should have been a world news. But nobody spoke about it, nobody wrote about it. Why? Because it's not convenient for the Zionists to write.
Very terrible. But the main thing we have to remember is what Rabbi Weiss mentioned before. Muslims, Islam, and Islamic leaders never had a problem with Jewish people, and never had a problem living together with people following Jewish faith. The Talmud is nothing new. The Orthodox Jewish observant Jews always believed in the Torah, always believed in the Talmud. This wasn't a reason of not being able to coexist and to hate each other. And this is a proof, at least religious people would understand it, this is a proof that most of these things, all of them, are totally wrong.
If you could give people a soundbite, a short thing that they could walk away with, a short statement that they could walk away, what would the message be that you would want to give them about how Jews feel about Islam today.
We need to remember, first of all, the big difference between Judaism and Zionism. It's not in the same. The State of Israel does not represent Judaism, neither the entire Jewish people. And as far as Islam, we always had a different religion. The Torah never changed. Islam, the Quran never changed. We did live in peace. We did respect each other. It's only this political, purely political state of Israel that causes the problem.
We got on this publication on the 26th of April 2005. We saw on South African television when the Orthodox Jews were being chased out of the synagogues. I don't know if you remember watching it on television. And the news that we got covered for South Africa was that they refused to leave Palestinian land. That was the reason that...
Today's Zionist leaders that supposedly, God forbid, the Jewish religion would allow the killing of innocent Palestinian children. This is terrible. This is painful. This is against whatever is holy. By taking out verses out of context, anybody can do that in any religion. There are many criticisms to Islam as well. Whether that's true or not, the Muslims should say, I'm sure it's not true.
Interpretation.
Exactly. Well, I wouldn't even consider this interpretation. It's misconstruing. Interpretation most probably would be true. But misconstruing and taking out of context is something that would find a very, very small number of supposedly Orthodox Jews in the army. It's rare to find.
Part of Judaism is because I believe the book has lots of writings in it that are very inhumane.
God forbid there's inhumane issues in the Talmud. It's very important to understand. This is one of the sad, tragic happenings from today, where the Zionists are using any verse they can, not only from the Talmud but from the Torah as well. As I was told, I didn't have a chance to follow the news, exactly what I was told over the phone, that there are some quotes of some edicts of